This is part 3 of my Avengers Endgame Hawkeye Ronin build. You can get the pattern for this build right here on my Etsy shop or for a limited time on my Patreon. And I'll do the archery specific bracer in part 4 for you guys, so stay tuned for that. If you're anything like me, you like shirts. And funny enough, I've designed some shirts. So check the links out below this video for shirts that I've designed. Every purchase helps the channel out. As always, this video is brought to you by LONSDALE Leather in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I get almost all my leather and supplies through them. If you've seen the other parts of this series, you'll know that this is all pretty much the same thing. We're going to trace out our pattern, cut it all out, and then once that's done, we're going to get to beveling. We've got 2 parts for each of these bracers. We've got the main body part and then these smaller pieces that are going to cover any gap at the wrist for where the closure is. Now it's time for some leather carving. I'm going to wet both of my pieces so they're both ready, and I may have to add some more water later. Trace it out with my stylus, and then once we've traced it out with the stylus, we're going to get to our swivel knife cuts. I'm going to use a ruler in certain parts to keep the line nice and straight, especially these long lines. And though this is a really simple carving, straight lines, well, once they're a little wobbly, can look a little weird, but don't stress too much. Now we're going to use this stylus to bevel. I use this a lot when I'm building costumes. It's not as deep a bevel as stamping, but it helps speed up the process. Once I go over it with the stylus, I'll hit it with the beveler, just like I was doing there. And then on these shorter areas, I'll do some stamping. This will get those corners really nice and crisp and make everything pop nicely. I literally just made that thumbs up animation, and I'm pretty proud of it, just saying. I'll use the beveler to smooth out any of the harsh edges if I want to remove them. So that's what I did there. Here I'm just opening up these lines a little more. I don't want to bevel them too much, I just want them to pop a little better. We're going to dye both pieces with black, both sides. Make sure you hit the top 2 or 3 times to get it nice and saturated. Then buff off any excess and get it ready for painting. Most metallic paints need a lot of layers to look good. You may want to try a white base coat or primer. I was patient and just kept layering it up until I was happy. After I've got the top coat all done, I'm going to move on to the edges. Make sure they're all covered in gold. And then I'm going to take some black paint, water it down a fair bit, and put it all over the gold. After I've done this, I'm going to wipe it away. This will make it look a little more aged and help it pop more. Just make sure the black is pretty watered down so you don't overdo it and get a big smudgy black part on your bracer. Here you can see them side by side. Subtle difference, but it looks pretty good. This marker was amazing when it was new. Now it's really old, so it takes a little work, but I just want to crisp up those edges just in case they're seen to make it look a lot more finished. After this, we're going to burnish the edges. I went over the paint as well as the dyed areas, and I had done this on previous parts of this costume, but I haven't done this ever before, and it worked out fine. The edges were smooth, and it looked good. Because it's going over paint, it's not really burnishing the edges, it's just kind of compressing the paint a bit and adding a little bit of wax. Now we're just going to buff off any excess wax and move on to putting a finish on it. I'm using my spray gun and Phoebing's Leather Bomb Atom Wax. There's lots of finish options. That's not necessarily my favorite one, but I keep coming back to it for some reason. This is the closure that I came up with. I wanted it to be permanent and stretchy. So I've got elastic, a piece of leather, and my sewing machine. I'm going to burn the edges of the elastic so it doesn't fray apart. Sew one side of the elastic onto the leather, and then I'm going to sew that other side of the leather onto the bracer. And then where I've got these holes here, I'm going to rivet that to the other side of the bracer. You could do this all with rivets. You could close it some other way if you wanted to, but this is what I was doing. The one mistake I made here was the holes to rivet onto the other side of the bracer were way too far from the edge. So if I had just left these 2 rivets on here, that one edge would just pop up. They need to be closer to where it joins, and I guess I had a brain fart, which is okay. I'm allowed to have a brain fart every once in a while. After I've marked it and punched the holes, I'm just going to roll the piece a bunch to give it a good form. And then when I rivet it together, I'm going to fix that whole issue with the other side by just adding a third rivet, which will bring everything tighter together and stop that other edge from flaring up. So obviously there's lots of different ways you could close this. This is just the way I decided to do it. I love button studs, but obviously buckles and snaps would work great for this project. I can't wait to see some pictures of what you guys come up with for your finished costumes. Well, there you have it, the bracer's done. Now, this is probably the easiest part of this costume build, and even though it's part 3 of the video series, you may want to tackle this one first. So I could rename this, I guess, but that would be cheating. And until next time, keep on being creative in whatever it is you do.